Good morning. It's a great joy to welcome you to this inaugural panel, where I am privileged to have three distinguished leaders of foundations here in the United States, all of whom Susan and I are also privileged to call friends, and they're people whom we admire, leading foundations we admire, doing important work that intersects with themes that are important to us here at Belmont, especially the importance of character. To my immediate right is Clay Robbins, who is the President and Chairman of the Lilly Endowment, private philanthropy based in Indianapolis, Indiana. He is a lawyer by training and has been at the endowment now for many years and now serving as the president and chairman of the board. Next to him is Heather Templeton Dill, who is the president of the Templeton Foundation based in Philadelphia. She is the granddaughter of Sir John Templeton and has been the president of the foundation now for 5 years, I believe. 6. You've finished 6 now. And I think I'm supposed to say truth in advertising. I'm a member of her board, and so have a privilege of working closely with her and seeing her leadership in action. And to her right is Jim Rahn, who is the president of the Kern Family Foundation that is based just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in Waukesha. Or even more technically, I think Genesee Depot in Wisconsin. The Kern Family Foundation was started by Mr. and Mrs. Bob Kern a number of years ago, and Jim has been president there for 14 years at the Kern Family Foundation. Each of these foundations does work in various ways around themes of character, purpose, and entrepreneurial mindset, themes that are really important to us at Belmont and that I have cared about for a very long time. So we look forward to the conversation, and thank you all for being here. I want to just begin, and I'm going to ask Jim, you to speak first, since your founder still is living and you work with Mr. Kern. Mrs. Kern sadly died a couple of years ago. And then we'll turn to Heather, who knew her grandfather well, and then Clay, who has had to learn about his founder, Eli Lilly, through other people and through writings and things. But I'm interested in the animating vision of the foundation of your founder, and especially why character matters and how that intersects with other themes that you work on and think a lot about. So, Jim?
Great. Well, I was just with Mr. Kern yesterday afternoon. He'll turn 96 within the next couple of weeks. And he and Patricia, who's deceased for about 4 years now, launched and ran for about 50 years a company that today is known as Generac Holdings. It's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, just popped into the S&P 500 in March. But while the Kerns were involved, it was a privately held company based in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And they raised their family there, and they partnered with thousands of families across southeastern, south central Wisconsin, and northeastern Iowa to create and build what was then called Generac Power Systems. And when you're doing an entrepreneurial venture, you're never quite sure how the ending will go. It turned out quite well for them. They sold a portable products division of their company. They make standby power equipment in 1998 and seeded an avocational foundation mission at that point. And then in 2006, when Mr. Kern was in his early 80s, they sold the rest of the company and then turned to a vocational pursuit of philanthropy and really started to think about what was that legacy going to be. And they knew they wanted to focus on the rising generation, and they've arbitrarily said, let's focus on people under age 30, believing that the most important responsibility each of us has individually, as families or as communities, is the nurture and care of the rising generation. And then in terms of reflecting on what did it take to build a successful business and to have that business be an integral part of the community, they began to think about what are those notions that allow young people to build flourishing lives and to contribute to flourishing communities. And through a lot of conversations and anecdotes, we teased out what we call our three animating ideas, which are character, believing that in any kind of social structure, if you have more than a single person, you need some basis of character on which that can work. Families don't work without a basis of character, schools, government, companies. They also wanted to focus on the nurture of an entrepreneurial mindset, believing that in this flat, accelerating world in which we live, if young people don't grow to have an entrepreneurial or enterprising spirit, it'll be difficult to lead a meaningful, satisfying, and sustainable life. And we're upstream from entrepreneurship to a way of thinking, perceiving, and interacting with the world. And our shorthand for that is curiosity, connections, and creating value. And then finally, the Kerns had noticed how for far too many people, their lives had become disintegrated, and they were seeing as separate spheres their faith, their work, and their understanding of the broader economy. And they believed that far easier to live a meaningful life if you see how those are integrated, one's faith or beliefs, one's view of work, and then the broader economy and how you fit in. So for us, the facets of the human flourishing gemstone that we're focused on are the character, entrepreneurial mindset, and this what we call integration of faith, work, and economics. In this context, I'd say it's a re-articulation of the doctrine of vocation.
Heather, your grandfather cared a lot about character and actually stipulated not only that you and the staff would pay attention to specific virtues, but that the board would pay attention to all of those and be aware of them. Why did Sir John care about the themes that he cared about?
Well, I think of my grandfather's life in three components. First is the community in which he was raised, then his experience in business, and then his philanthropic vision for the philanthropies that he created. My grandfather is from the state of Tennessee. He was born and raised in Winchester, Tennessee. He talks about the community where he grew up as a place where your word was your bond, and where thrift and reliability were values that promulgated throughout the community. And in that environment, he learned the value of using these principles in his life. So it started with the community in which he was raised. And then in business, my grandfather was a mutual fund investor. He created a variety of different funds for individuals to invest in. And he learned along the way that while analyzing a business in terms of its profit and market capitalization and other aspects that you would consider when investing in a business, he also wanted to know who led the business. What was the management team like? What were the values that they held as they operated that business? And he thought that was also important to success in investing, success in business. And both of these then contributed to his philanthropic vision. As he was able to be successful, he thought, what can I do to serve the world in a different way? And he reflected on his upbringing, he reflected on people in business that he admired, and he reflected on his own principles that he used throughout his life. He began to collect maxims and write his own. He called these laws of life. And that became an animating vision for him when he created his philanthropies, that if he could encourage really people from all age groups, but particularly young people, to think about the values that were important to them, where those values came from, and write about them and reflect on them, then they would incorporate them into their lives and would also inspire others to live a life of character and value. So those were some of the components that contributed to him creating a private foundation where one of our areas of investment is character development, encouraging others to live out a life of values and principles. And we focus on that by investing in research on character, and I can say more about that in our conversation.
Thanks. Clay, when you became president and chairman of the Lilly Endowment, you discovered that Mr. Lilly, while you have program areas, that there was a real focus on the importance of character and shaping community and civic life that kind of underlies all of the program areas in a strong way. What was it about Mr. Lilly and his relationship to his pastor and to the kind of animating concerns that shaped the Lilly Endowment?
Well, I want to say first that the endowment was actually founded by Eli Lilly's father and also his brother. So we have three founders, and my colleagues and I are constantly in awe of how thoughtful, intelligent, principled these gentlemen were. That they founded the endowment in 1937, in the middle of the Depression, and there are a lot of values and thoughts that they had that resonate very much with Kerns and Templetons. Almost like you could you could substitute the names and it would be the same. And so we have a number of writings that J.K. Sr., who was the father of Eli Lilly, and J.K. Jr., and that was very interesting when you look at what they thought was important for a good life. When Eli Lilly was asked at one point what he hoped the foundation could accomplish, he did say, "I would hope we could improve the character of the American people." And he spent a lot of time and money on trying to understand, how do you teach character? Can it be taught? And he also then would be very much interested in how our programs would integrate, like you were saying. And so we have three divisions. One is religion, one is education, and one is community development. And so it was important to them that those three came together. But I think what really animated their philanthropy and establishing the foundation was their faith. And it was very much evident in what they did, and they really felt that was so important, not only to an individual, but to communities.
Thanks. You all are entrusted with the responsibility not just to make grants, but to think about strategies to help accomplish those purposes that the founders created. And I'd be interested, Heather, starting with you, what's an area where you've invested, or a project or a grant that you think has really helped move the needle, both in a community or in an area, and that you feel excited about, that's helping address these issues that animated your founders?
We, as I mentioned a moment ago, one of the ways in which my grandfather wanted to allocate the resources he left to philanthropy was to invest in scholars and researchers and those who were trying to understand some of these values that he held to be very dear and important to a life that's a well-lived life, a flourishing life. So over the years, we have invested in philosophers and theologians and psychologists and other disciplines to study individual values such as generosity, gratitude, humility, hope, optimism. These are all areas that you can research and you can learn about. How do you cultivate these ideas? How do we encourage others to pursue these ideas? And then we were able to start investing in sort of character broadly. And one of the ways in which we did that was a major grant to Wake Forest University, starting back in 2009, so over a decade ago. And that was called the Character Project. And the idea there was, there are some questions we can interrogate through research and scholarship. So let's redistribute some of that grant money to other researchers. And what is exciting about that is because we can focus on interventions, programs, but sometimes we need to just take a step back and ask what works. If it works, why do we know that it works? And how do we know that it works when it comes to encouraging character development across the lifespan? So that character project brought, again, together theologians, philosophers, psychologists to study. That created a network of people who now know each other and can pursue additional questions. And the outcome of that research is a better understanding of how one can create an institution or a space where all of those who participate in that community, in that institution, can develop their character. And so now we know the value of personal relationships and seeing exemplars of character and having an opportunity to reflect, encouraging students to reflect on the values that are important to them. So that's one of the major investments that we've made. That's an investment in a specific institution.
Great, thank you. Clay, what are some things that you all have been doing that has really excited you or engaged you as you think about fulfilling the founder's vision?
Well, there are a couple, and they're very different. The first one, we have a major initiative that we've been working with for 20 years probably, called Programs for the Theological Exploration of Vocation. And we funded, I think, initially about 88 colleges, they're faith-related colleges in the United States, to develop programs for their students where they could intentionally consider what their calling is in life and what are they meant to do with their lives. And that's really caught on, and we weren't sure whether it would, but it really did. And then after 2 or 3 rounds of funding over several years, it then now is operated by the Council of Independent Colleges, and it's called NetView. And the endowment still supports the programming NetView does for these colleges, but it has grown now to over 220 colleges in the country that have these programs where they're really working with their students to have them ask very discerning questions about what they should do about their lives. Some parents haven't been too happy with it because they sort of thought their children should be doctors or lawyers, and they may come back and find out they've got a calling to be an actor or an artist. And but I think by and large they get along eventually, and they're not blaming us too much for this change in their plans. Another is that we've made a companion grants to Indiana University and Purdue University in Indiana. Both of them have very significant artificial intelligence capacities. They're doing a lot of research in these areas. And it's been a concern of ours and theirs for some time that this artificial intelligence is so powerful and can so affect our lives that it's very important that students, while they're learning this knowledge, that they also have ethics and character along with it, so that they will be thoughtful about how in the future it's used for good of humankind rather than negative purposes. So it's brought together several different departments on both campuses, and they're actually working together and hosting some national conferences in this. So I'm kind of excited about that and seeing where that might head.
Thanks, Clay. Jim?
Well, I want to begin this answer by saying I'm immensely grateful for Heather and Clay and the work that their teams are doing, because we've been able to sort of draft in behind the work that they've been doing, and we wouldn't be anywhere close to where we are without that deep intellectual spade work that the Templeton Foundation is doing, and the bold exploration of work like the study of vocation that Lilly is doing. So we come in right at the ground level with what can we do to change the lives of faculty and students right now. I'll give you one example, and I think I can connect here. So in 2005, in response to Mr. Kern's nudge to deal with this entrepreneurial mindset, where are we going to get started? Well, the team thought, well, if we can start with engineering students, it's a definable group. Arguably, you could say the manifestations and the benefits of engineers coming out with such a spirit could have a disproportionate impact on society. So let's see if we can work with undergraduate engineering colleges, technical schools, to instill the entrepreneurial mindset in 100% of their undergrads. Fast forward to today, we have a network of 50 universities. They're part of the Kern Entrepreneurial Engineering Network. There's a movement called engineeringunleashed.com. We have around 4,000 faculty who are very engaged in this community, and it's undeniable that this has changed undergraduate engineering education. About 5 or 6 years ago, though, faculty and leaders from the network were saying, are we ever going to talk about character? And we said, well, you, the R1 public engineering schools, who guffawed a little bit when we talked about mindset, want to move into the character space. And they said yes. And we said, well, why is that? And they said, well, as we are now nurturing one another's mindsets and that of our students, and they ours, we can't go any deeper unless we address this issue of character. So can we talk about the character? And then, subsequently, are we going to talk about vocation? Because now that we're nurturing one another's mindsets and character, we're starting to talk differently about our work. And so we've been able to utilize the good work that the Templeton Foundation has done around creating frameworks and approaches for addressing character, and then bring them right down to the classroom and campus level. And similarly then with this work around vocation. So we haven't had to go out and reinvent. We've been able to repurpose and hopefully leverage in ways that they would be pleased with. So in a lot of ways, we're drafting off the good work that these two and their teams are doing.
Thanks. One of the things I hear in that, Jim and Heather and Clay, is that the importance of working together and also creating networks and relationships. Clay, you talked about NetView, of which Belmont is delighted to be a participant. And I was pleased when I got here to see that Belmont's engaged with NetView and those relationships. I'd like to start with you, Clay. As you've thought about the programs for the theological exploration of vocation, why it's important not just to give grants to individual institutions, but to build those relationships and those networks, and the role that has as a kind of multiplier effect in terms of trying to infuse a broader conversation and affect change.
Yeah, I've been amazed over the years, and our religion division has particularly done this, but we've seen it now in education. Actually 2 days ago, we convened all 37 of the Indiana colleges and universities together for a conference. And there was just a buzz in the room. Now, part of it was the pandemic is kind of waning, and so they actually could see each other. They'd been connecting through Zoom, so that was kind of fun. But I think they really did enjoy, and many of these institutions are facing existential challenges right now. And to find that they're not alone means an awful lot to them. And they get ideas and they start to talk about, well, they could maybe collaborate, maybe together they could do something less expensively, or they could do it better. There's all kinds of possibilities. In the religion work, we found that, there are, all over the country, they may seem sort of isolated, and then when they come together, they realize that they have others who care about the same things, and they can learn from them, and you really can just feel it in the room sometimes that there's a real appreciation of the chance to get together and learn together. So I think it's very important to do both, the individual grant making, but then figure out a way. And you were involved many times at Duke with us, because we would have Duke serve as a coordinator of a large initiative where they would really take responsibility for evaluation and for bringing them together, reporting, and then reporting back out to everybody. And that was a very valuable function, and we continue to use those sorts of approaches.
Yeah, thanks. I learned a lot, and we learned a lot at Duke from those sorts of relationships. Jim, you, in addition to the work you did in engineering, you created a medical transformation network with schools, and you've generously and graciously invited Belmont as we launch a new College of Medicine to become part of those conversations. Could you talk about your own thinking about networks and why that's important in thinking about medical education?
Sure. When the foundation was in its avocational phase, its primary program was what we called the Kern Scholars Program, and this was a program for scholarshiping young people, under age 27 upon entry to seminary who sensed a call to pastoral ministry and were committed to pastoring churches in North America upon graduation. And intuitively, right out of the gate, the Kerns did not just scatter scholarships across America, but they concentrated them within 8 seminaries. So there could be cohorts of students, and there could be networks of those students within each of those universities. And then those seminaries were brought together in a network. And shortly after that, this Keen network, the engineering group. So this was intuitively happening right out of the gate. And we were pursuing that. And I think it was around 2010, a sociologist from the University of Virginia, James Davison Hunter, wrote a book that was published, I believe, by the Yale University Press, To Change the World, the irony, tragedy, and possibilities for Christianity in the late modern era. And in that book, Hunter reviews the last 2,500 years of Western civilization in part and says, when culture changed, it changed when you had networks and overlapping dense networks of leaders and institutions who were aligned with a common vision and a shared set of ideas. And that gave us some intellectual underpinning for what had been an intuitive work, and allowed us to be a bit more sophisticated about the network building. And so when Dr. John Raymond at the Medical College of Wisconsin informed me that he was shuttering his lab. He had done his postdoc at Duke in the lab of a Nobel Prize winner. He's a molecular pharmacologist, was doing wonderful things. He said, I'm shuttering my lab, never to reopen it again, because I want to dedicate the rest of my career to education reform. I think I can have far more impact on culture by doing that than if I were to pursue a Nobel Prize. So that started a series of conversations in which, right out of the gate, we identified other presidents or deans of medical schools who were interested in reforming medical education. And when we brought that group together, we didn't have an agenda for them. We brought them together and said, what needs to change? Do you want to work together? And then, can you work together? We did a pilot project that proved yes, they could. And they gelled around the idea of saying, we need to reform medical education, but we need to use the lenses of character, caring, and competence as the lens. And this has taken off organically because it meets the felt need of faculty and students. So for example, at the Medical College of Wisconsin, within a couple months, the students just self-formed a virtue ethics student group, and then the faculty were like, well, we probably should have an advisor for that work. So this started with a group of 7 medical schools, including Vanderbilt here in Nashville, and now we've been privileged to partner with you and with your founding dean, Bill Bates, to start right out of the gate with that focus and connection with HCA. And then back to the good work that Templeton had done at Wake Forest. We're bringing an investment proposal forward next week to our board to grow the program on leadership and character so that they can support the launch of a new medical school in Charlotte in partnership with Atrium Health, also right out of the gate focused on this intersection of character, competence, and caring. So the network in that case is beginning to grow. I'll stop
Wonderful.
there.
Thanks. Heather, when your dad was president, he made a significant investment in the Jubilee Center at the University of Birmingham, and James Arthur has been leading that and has had enormous impact in building networks and multiplier effect. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why your father wanted to start the Jubilee Center and how Templeton has related to that as one of those networks that helps build relationships and affect change.
Well, the founding of the Jubilee Center for Character Virtue is a story of sort of making an incremental investment in an individual scholar and then seeing what happens. And so the John Templeton Foundation had been supporting James Arthur and his scholarship. Along the way, he had the opportunity to meet my father, who served as president of the John Templeton Foundation until 2015, and share his passion. This is James Arthur's passion for taking scholarship into the classroom. So doing the hard work to lay an intellectual foundation or a theoretical framework, and then saying, how can we get this into the classroom so that teachers, who really have the job of shaping character, have those tools that they need. And from those conversations, my father saw the great vision of an extraordinary leader in this individual, James Arthur, and he said, let's make an investment really in the United Kingdom. So University of Birmingham is not based here. And my father said, we don't, at the John Templeton Foundation, we make 3-year grants typically, but he wanted to map out a timeline for a 10-year investment in the Jubilee Center, which would bring researchers together to ask all sorts of questions about character in the classroom, but also in medical institutions, for lawyers, and for other sort of professional careers. And with the University of Birmingham as a hub, James Arthur set out to say, well, who can I connect with? And he began forming relationships, many of which he had with scholars in the United States, and then was connected to people around the world who also cared about how to cultivate the good life through a set of virtues and values that we all share. And so that's the story that came along. We found a great researcher with a great vision who's able to pull together people and inspire them, and made a significant investment over many, many years. And we're coming just to the end of that 10-year time period. And what we have is an institution that has an international reputation and is a hub for many, many resources for many, many different fields all around the world.
Thanks.
I just want to add to that, because this Jubilee Center, if you all haven't taken a look at it, the framework around character, I've not seen anything like it, and we use it all the time, because it's just, in talking to people about it, it's kind of an elusive concept unless you really start to break it down, and you've done that in a beautiful way there.
Yeah. I would give the credit to my father, who had the vision, the passion, wanted to make this investment. And it's a great example of a network of different scholars, different disciplines coming together to work through these.
I'm going to jump in on that as well. Some of these areas, it can be difficult to build any kind of a network or a movement absent shared language and a shared framework. And we have found this Jubilee framework for character education, both in K-12 and higher education, to be one that really resonates quite broadly. So,
you and I had the privilege of spending some time in England and going around to schools that actually were embedding the character and virtue in K-12 education in very different contexts. That was quite inspiring to see how it can take hold. I want to follow up on that. All three of you invest in institutions in significant ways while you're creating these multiplier effects. Yuval Levine published a book that came out right before the pandemic, not great timing for a book launch, called A Time to Build. And one of the things he says at the beginning of the book is that we're suffering in America from 50 years of not paying very good attention to institutions and their importance. And he says institutions, insofar as we pay attention to them now, we've let them become platforms for celebrity, when if institutions are healthy, they're molds of character. And I've really thought about that and the importance of institutions, and particularly educational institutions, as places where character is molded. And whether it's the ways all of you have talked about Wake Forest, pioneering efforts in those areas, other institutions that you partner with, the University of Birmingham and James Arthur. It's not just people or scholars, it's finding those institutions that can become exemplars and nodes of networks, and Medical College of Wisconsin and those sorts of things. I'd love to hear you talk about how you all think about investing in institutions as agents of change, and why educational institutions in particular matter to you. Jim, why don't you start?
So for us, we think of our grantees and the nodes in our network along a continuum, and on the far one end, you'd have a vendor relationship. So this might be, wouldn't it be great if there were a piece of content like X, Y, or Z, a book or something, to partners, to strategic allies, to pillars. Our foundation is set up to sunset. So we're the least enduring institution in this room. And so we have to be thinking about something other than the Kern Family Foundation for sustainability. The work we're about is multi-generational. Mr. Kern has said on numerous occasions, if you're only working on problems you can solve in your own lifetime, you're thinking way too small. So we're a foundation that sunsets in 2035. We're trying to impact multi-generational change, and we believe in the power of networks and overlapping dense networks of leaders, but yes, also institutions. So without those institutional nodes in our networks, our strategy sort of falls apart. And so the question on the institutional investment is the project we're talking about, and are the ideas, is this an institutional ought, an institutional calling, as opposed to the passion of a handful of scholars? And it's one of the reasons we're so excited to invest in Belmont this year, as you were coming in, Greg, to meet your outgoing and now Milton Johnson, your new board chair, Thomas Burns, the provost, the 13 or so deans, and faculty, and to see that this is an institutional calling or ought. So I think in those situations, we'd be crazy not to make institutional investments.
Thanks. Heather?
So first of all, I think institutions, particularly educational institutions, are a great framework for the development of character, because there are so many components to an institution, which starts with the purpose. Why does the institution exist, and what are they aspiring to do? And then there are always a set of rituals that go along with being part of any institution. There are people and personal relationships. There are opportunities for reflection. So an institution can create that environment for character to emerge. And I think for us, we do often look at an individual researcher who always brings a team to the table when they're pursuing a project as a leader of an idea. And sometimes that maps on to an institutional leader who carries the vision, and sometimes it's the individual who starts down a path with their team of researchers to pursue a question, and the institution sort of comes along with them as the scholarship continues. So for us, we see institutions as a place where character is formed, and we are sometimes making investments in institutions where the leader wants to encourage a different way of thinking, or encourage the life of their students or the people in the institution. And sometimes it's an individual and their team who create sort of the seed that begins to flourish within an institution. So we look at it in a variety of different ways.
Thanks. Clay?
Well, I think that relevant and effective institutions are critical to sustainability of any kind of an important cause or an effort in a community to improve life for people. And so I think they're very important, and they have to be strong, and I think funders need to understand just how difficult it is to operate institutions. And sometimes I think there's a penny-wise, pound-foolish approach to it by the government or by some when they don't fully understand what it costs to keep the lights on and to really have the kind of high-quality staff that you need to be good at it. Greg, you've done a lot of work with this in your tradition to innovation work with the most recent book, which I thought was wonderful. It's very important to keep institutions fresh. So I try to look at it not just as keeping an institution alive, but keeping the purpose of the institution alive. And sometimes that means the institution has to go away, or has to change radically. And other times it means it just has to adapt and continue to improve. And one of the sort of stories at the endowment is one that we use a lot and as we envision some of our grant making, and it's when J.K. Sr. was taking his colleagues from Lilly and Company in southern Indiana for a walk in the woods, and they came up on a hill, and he knew there was a place there where the trees had been cut down, and he had them look there, and he said, always cut a place for a lookout, have a vista. And that's been something that has stuck with us because it means reflection. It means take time to stop and think. And so one of the things that we do with institutions is to provide a lot of planning grants and reflection grants so that they can take time to think about and assess, are we relevant? Are we effective in what we're doing? Should something change? So I think that's really important, and you've helped a lot in helping to articulate that. So.
Thanks. I want to take a slight detour just because I've been struck that in addition to investing in established institutions, each of you has also focused on public engagement and in looking at major culture shapers, particularly in a time when character isn't as much of a focus in our broader culture, shaping the American people, to go back, Clay, to what you said about Mr. Lilly's question of improving the character of the American people, and that sort of impact. And Clay, I remember going back, one of the things that's marked your leadership at Lilly is that public engagement and investments in cultural institutions, including, TV shows like Religion and Ethics Newsweekly a number of years ago, but more recently looking at museums and other kinds of cultural institutions. How do you think about public engagement? Let's begin with you, Clay.
Well, I think it's important for particularly young people, but others to have their imagination kind of refreshed or stimulated. Museums do that. Cultural institutions do that. It's a way to bring people in to hopefully they'll want to learn more about the subject. And we have a major initiative underway now with, I think now maybe 40 different arts and cultural institutions, mostly museums around the country, where they are looking at their collections for the religious themes, the religious aspects of the collections, and then they're mounting a variety of exhibits and programs that I think the public will find very interesting. For example, the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, which is one of the largest in the country, collaborated with the National Geographic Society on an exhibit that traveled then, and it was one that showed the various pilgrimages that exist in the 5 major religions, and then it had all these wonderful photos over the years that National Geographic added to it, and it really caught on, and people loved it. And so that gave, I think, a vision to others. And so there are some, the Art Institute in Chicago and the Smithsonian have exhibits that are based on religious themes. The endowment also was attracted to the new museum in Washington, D.C., the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so we were one of the lead funders of that museum, largely because we wanted to fund the religion exhibits in the museum about African American history. And I'm really pleased with what that has done there. But there are just a number of ways to do that. But I think the idea is to try to have people focus in on this in a way that they will want to learn more about it when they leave the museum.
Thanks. Heather, you've probably noticed in board meetings that I'm not particularly adept at commenting on the physics proposals or some of the more technical scientific projects, but I often am really interested in our public engagement. And the Templeton Philanthropies, John Templeton and Templeton Religion Trust and Templeton World Charity Foundation co-sponsor the Templeton Prize, which is a very visible way of lifting up particular people. Francis Collins a year ago and Jane Goodall this year. How do you think about the importance of those kinds of public engagement in accomplishing work around character and entrepreneurial mindset and purpose?
I'll speak to the Templeton Prize first because you referenced that. This is a prize that started in 1973, and my grandfather looked at the Nobel Prizes and thought they honor everything except progress in religion, and he thought about the Templeton Prize in that way, that religion is actually progressing in ways, it's growing and developing, and he wanted to honor visionaries who exemplified that in their life. Mother Teresa was the first recipient of the Templeton Prize. And today, the Templeton Prize continues. It is a lifetime achievement award for individuals such as Francis Collins, Jane Goodall, who have a career generally in the sciences, but not exclusively, and see something beyond their scientific work. So engage with the spiritual dimension of life, of human flourishing. And my grandfather always talked about the Templeton Prize as a way to encourage people, particularly young people, to pursue something in their life that was meaningful and full of purpose. And so that's one of the ways in which we think about the Templeton Prize. We want to lift up these individuals who have made significant achievements over their lifetime, who see their achievements not as just something they've done, but as something that they've contributed to the world, and we hope that others would be inspired to do the same. And then outside of the Templeton Prize, we are always thinking about how can we take the research that we fund and translate it or make it accessible to a wide variety of people. And so that could just be anyone who's interested in the research that we're funding. We have supported efforts to train the researchers and scholars we support to engage with the media, to teach them how to write an op-ed, so that gets a wider circulation, to teach them how to be on a podcast, to teach them how to take their sort of academic topics and the academic words they use and use different words to say the same thing. Another area of public engagement, slightly different, is when we try to connect our scholars with practitioners. So we have people who'll study different character values such as self-control. They say, I want to create a curriculum. I want students to know this. And we encourage them, or sometimes they do it, that's part of their vision, to work with teachers, create a curriculum, try to test it in a classroom, get the feedback from the teacher, refine and revise, and then create something that can actually be used for the people who will implement it on a daily basis. So we think about public engagement in a number of different ways.
Thanks. Jim, one of the moments in our conversations over the years that gave me just an aha was when you started talking to me about your work with Pbs Kids in relation to character, and that just struck me as one of those moments I thought, oh, now there's going to be a place where there's impact. Talk a little bit about your work with Pbs Kids on character.
Sure. 80% of 2 through 6-year-olds consume content on the Pbs Kids various platforms, and 75% of moms of 2 through 6-year-olds consume content from the PBS platform. And Pbs Kids is the #1 most trusted brand of mothers in America. And the current generation of parents, young 20-somethings, are not interested in finding the next Dr. Spock who's going to help them solve parenting challenges. They're much more interested in what other parents of 2 through 6-year-olds are experiencing and how they're navigating that journey. Pbs Kids, really the founding, if you would, inspiration of that was Fred Rogers and then the creators of Sesame Street. And so you had Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sesame Street. You kind of have the basics of character formation coming here, and indeed both did have a focus on that. The infrastructure, though, around which this was being broadcast, curated, and developed, the frameworks were around math and literacy. So as a parent or a grandparent, if you wanted to help your child or grandchild learn more about the letter B or how to count to 10, you could search and all this content would come up. If you wanted to figure out what could we be doing around gratitude, you just had to know it was Daniel Tiger episode 627, minute, whatever. So our initial work with Pbs Kids was helping them develop a character framework, much like the frameworks they had for math and reading, that would then signal to the producers, this is what we would like to see, and then codifying all the existing content and new content around those character themes, and there's a rich repository of that. But unlike the math and literacy frameworks, we nudged them to have that forward facing, at least much of it, because unlike math or literacy, parents have no desire in outsourcing any aspect of character formation. And so they created then what they call their child development tracker. So if you want, say I have a 3-year-old and I'm wondering what honesty would look like and what are some exercises and the like, that work is done. And right before the pandemic had hit, they're surveying of work of parents. Parents were saying, we love this, but we'd like to be more intimately connected with other parents. And so they've developed both in English and Spanish resources that PBS affiliates across the country can use to bring parents together with their young children with some curated experiences around formation.
Thanks. We're about out of time, but I want to give you all a chance to offer one piece of advice to us here at Belmont. I'm not going to specify to me as president because that would take too long for you to give enough advice to fix me. But as you think about Belmont, a Christ-centered institution that cares about these themes, character, purpose, and entrepreneurial mindset, and as you think about the landscape of education, one or two sentences of what you hope we would be focused on and keep mindful of. And let me begin with Jim and then Heather and then Clay.
Any notion that young people and their parents aren't hungry and thirsty for a full-time Christian college education is just not true. There's an insatiable hunger and thirst for what Belmont offers. And I would just go forth boldly. I think there's immense potential for you to grow in ways that you are already envisioning and in ways that you have not yet envisioned. So I think the opportunities are only ones that are bounded mentally by what you're capable of imagining.
And I would say, see every opportunity, every offering at Belmont as an opportunity to engage in character development and the spiritual development of the students. So whether that's in an assignment or working with a student as they come to you for additional help, or the performances that take place, or the competitions in the athletic arenas, or the bouncy house and other student events. I think all of those are opportunities to speak into the lives of these individual students and see the whole community as contributing to that effort.
I agree with everything they've said. One thing I might add, somewhat coming from our recent work with the colleges in Indiana, is that I think and the seminaries too around the country of late, I think it's really important to help the students be prepared to be effective and happy, really, in a very complicated, diverse world that they're going to be living in. The demographic changes in the country, the fact that we're so connected globally and the way technology is changing our world, how will they be able to keep their character, their faith, and have it be strong and relevant, actually, in a new world, and one very different than I came into.
Thank you. Jim, Heather, Clay, all of you, each of you, are an inspiration to Susan and me. We're thankful for your presence here and for the leadership you provide through your foundations. Would you join me in thanking these wonderful people?